Hello, and welcome to a conversation with George EGELY, part of the LENR Forum series on conversations with notable workers in the LENR field. George is with me at the IWAM conference in Assisi, Italy, 2022, which has about 50 or 60 participants, all discussing work in the field. And I want to ask George a question, some questions about his work, and which is very interesting, new look at plasma technology. Yeah, I think that's is that an accurate description, George? Perhaps you could tell us.
No,
That's it.
No, I protest. I'm really keenly interested in old forgotten work because it's a wrong assumption to think that all inventions and all discoveries were always used by scientists. No, it is a general tendency that only a small fraction of very good inventions are seeing ever the market, and only a small fraction of discoveries ever gets the attention of the scientific community.
This is something that we are in complete agreement on. Most of my day job involves working on metallurgy or metallurgical problems, and I think that the publications of scientific publications of the last maybe 150 years are a treasure trove, because people discovered things and they published in absolute detail what they discovered and how they made it work. And I think that's very important. But to come to your present work, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about it.
I'm personally involved at this moment with direct electricity production, which is the repetition of the work of Henry Moray, who discovered this effect 120 years ago, and of Nikola Tesla, who discovered the direct electricity production by LENR, though at that time he never used this expression. So he discovered 150 years ago. So we have to go back 150 years in science history in order to find the first traces. Of course, we can imagine that at the time there was not even a faint hope to understand LENR, when people had no idea what is the matter is made of, nucleus, and even the electron was unknown. So we can imagine that it was really a flight in the dark. They just published their discovery, but there was no explanation whatsoever. And I think that we are still struggling and will struggle with the explanation for the next 50 years or so.
Well, there is an expression in English that he who forgets history will never build the future. Yeah, and I think that really sums up what you're doing. In your work, would you describe yourself as a theoretician or an engineer or an experimenter? I, for example, say I'm an engineer, chemist, experimenter, probably in about that order.
In this field, it's a luxury to handle only one side of the coin. We have to understand theory up to a certain degree in order to devise models and to check, let's say, ideas. Of course, experiment has the main thrust, because if we are unable to put working stuff on the table, then our life is worthless. Society really expects cheap, reliable, abundant energy, and it is I think, quite obvious each day that this is the important aspect of the LENR work, and our community has really the chance and the only chance to bring to the market a device which works day and night, winter, summer, whatever.
It's a great hope, and I begin to see, some evidence that we can do it, and I'm very pleased to be part of that effort myself. But to come back to you, you mentioned Henry Moray, and who was obviously a remarkable man, and there are many independent accounts of by creditable, knowledgeable people, university professors and so on in America, that his device actually worked. And but he said he was dependent on something called the Swedish stone, or it was suggested that there was this magic ingredient in his material. Have you discovered that, or have you found a way to avoid needing it?
No, actually, I came face to face with this effect, and it's a threshold switch effect, and the so-called, in the periodic table of element, column 6 is the chalcogenide elements like oxygen and sulfur and so on and so on. And when you make a semiconductor out of them, it's a threshold switch. And this is what he discovered, but US Patent Office flatly rejected it. He fought with them for 30 odd years, but anyway, he never got it. However, 30 years later, another absolutely outsider, Ovshinsky, found it, and he was able to get a patent on it. And the rewritable CDs and DVDs are working on this principle, actually. So it hit the market. But at the time, of course, Moray and the whole semiconductor industry was not even in its infancy. So it was very early, very primitive. And unfortunately, LANR, that is cold fusion, requires the same amount of capital investment, the best brains, the most competitive brains, to have the same level as semiconductor industry has now.
I think I've recently been encouraging another experiment to try and contact a small chemical semiconductor company in England to discuss his idea with them. But you mentioned the word threshold switch. What's it the threshold to? That's a doorway. Where do you think it goes? Where does the energy come from?
No, the energy is not coming from the threshold, it comes from the plasma. However, it is the art when you switch on the spark and when you switch off. Because if you don't have this threshold switch, then let's say you make your contact at 1 kilovolt instead of 20 kilovolts, and then you don't get too much excess energy. However, this switch must be extremely efficient, very fast, with very, very little ohmic resistance. So it's a small miracle in itself. And unfortunately, or fortunately, semiconductors are of an extremely wide variety. Most people think semiconductors in terms of doped silicon, which has a regular crystal structure. However, these semiconductors are a different word because they are glassy, non-crystalline, and they are made of completely different materials. Fortunately, there is a so-called second quantum revolution going on now, where solid-state physics is again blossoming, and each day there are new understanding of fundamental physical phenomena like spin, which was put aside so far. And my personal opinion that we have to look for our solution here. But of course, there is more to this cake because we have to deal here with plasma physics as well. So it's not restricted to a small area, relatively small, because condensed matter physics is extremely wide. And we have to even add plasma physics, and within plasma physics, spark discharges, of course.
That's thank you. It's a very comprehensive description of the philosophy, if you like, behind your work and the principles. And it reminds me, by the way, I digress a moment, about this old work I was doing years ago, building crystal sets with germanium diodes, yeah, which were the latest thing at the time. Yeah, and I think some of the early solid-state research did have some very interesting reported but never followed up. Things were revealed. As you know, I've been working with Frank Gordon, perhaps you know, on the lattice energy converter stuff, and I came across a mention of the very same effect in a textbook written by De Breuer in Cambridge in 1935. Anomalous voltage. Don't understand that. Move on. He didn't investigate it. But to come back to your work, I'm sure you're aware of the work of Sapphire in Canada and America. Is there any connection between what they're doing and what you're doing? Their systems are very large, and they're running at very high current and so on. But in a conversation with Montgomery Childs, who's their lead researcher, he did say to me that during the collapse of the fields that they created, the layered plasma structures, when they collapsed, they were recovering extraordinary amounts of energy. Yeah, and do you see a connection there?
The connection is with the LENR, but then after there are really, in my opinion, hundreds of possible technical realization. And of course, due to our extremely limited budget, we are working on a shoestring budget. We are unable to follow all the unbeaten paths. So I'm, in a sense, a little bit oddball in this field, because my opinion is that LENR is an extremely vast field. And unfortunately, so far researchers, or most of researchers, were following the Pons-Fleischmann path, which is interesting and challenging in terms of science. However, the last 30, 40 years proved that there is not much to gain economically from producing heat when the input is electric energy. So this is the reason I focus my attention on electricity in, electricity out, because that is what we need. That is energy policy, environment, and the health of planet Earth requires.
I think you're on the right track, and if it gives you any encouragement, very recently I've been talking to Ed Storms about this particular thing. He too has begun to look at the, currently as a side effect, but he's very interested to realize that some of the LENR systems that he's working on down there in New Mexico are actually producing electricity. He had never looked, but it was there. It is there, and he's quite excited about it. So you're obviously leading the field in a particular direction, which is going to expand. It's going to grow. The search for direct electricity rather than heat, because, as you say, you need a lot of heat to be able to reconvert to electricity or whatever for it to be really useful. And but direct electricity from a system with no requirement, no major requirement for fuel. It's not as if you have to throw a new nugget of palladium into this or whatever into the system every day, but that such a system, even if it produces a low amount of energy, perhaps a few hundred watts, would be transformative. As I say there are 1 billion people in the world who depend on kerosene lanterns to light their homes at night. And the problems that causes, respiratory problems, health problems, their children can't do homework because when they come home from school it's dark, and so on. And people need to be liberated from that kind of life. And LENR, even at a tiny level, even if you have no energy, 5 watts is a huge amount. Yeah, it's all the difference between having nothing in your pocket and $1 when you're hungry.
Sure, at ICCF 24 this summer in California, I was able online to demonstrate a small portable pocket-sized device which is producing electrical energy. And our major effort is now going on to have a feedback loop. So the outpouring energy should be fed back to the system, so no outside source of electric energy is needed. Then it is easy to comprehend, easy to understand that something useful and something unusual is going on. And this would give the deserved reputation of the LENR field, which is quite belated. Unfortunately, I feel each day the breath of oil industry on my back. This is the most suppressed field. This is a shame and disgust in organized science that they don't give us the well-deserved support.
Well, that's very inspiring, George, and as we were in a religious house here doing this, having this conversation, I say God bless you and protect you, and it gives us hope to us all, really, that we're just trying to do the right thing to make the planet better, and for our children, our grandchildren, and their children too. And anyway, thank you very much, George, and thank you for your time, and thank you for your work. It's very important.
Thank you, and everybody who is seeing this video can find a lot more details on my papers in Infinite Energy, 8 very long papers, so there is enough background material to read on the technical background.